All right, everyone. So this class essentially is going to be a nice overview of Blender for game, film, and just animation as a whole. And what I'm going to focus on is less of the artistry in this class, like sculpting and digital painting and all that stuff, and more about just the technical know-how. So when you first open Blender, you're approached by this scene here. If you're used to other versions of Blender, I'm using 4.3 or other programs, you can adjust your key mapping here to other industry comparable applications. I just leave it at Blender. You can also set it up so it's like Maya, things like this. I'm going to click off of that and leave that alone. The major things I do, and I hope this is the same on Mac, I'm getting a Mac to record lectures in the future because I know a lot of you use those for your laptops, is I go to Edit Preferences here. And I look for, and again, you might have to do Google searches over some of this if you're on a Mac, but I go to key mapping here and I make sure tab for pie menu is on. With that on, I can hit the tab key and it brings up all of the different windows. For example, texture painting, weight, object mode, sculpting, and all that. I'm gonna go ahead and escape on that. The other thing is on input, you might want to turn on, if you don't have a numpad on your right, emulate numpad. Let's actually hit escape here. Let's see what else in key mapping that we can do. Let's see, key binding. I think overall that looks good. Let's go ahead and close this out. So how do you move around and stuff in Blender? Well, if you're going to need a mouse for this class. I've had students try to take my animation course without a mouse. They end up buying one. Please buy one. Don't use your trackpad. It will make your life miserable and you'll be turning assignments in late. So with that said, I'm going to be explaining how to use the mouse to navigate. So you can scroll in or zoom in and out on an object with your mouse wheel. You can left click on an object and you'll see it'll highlight up here in the scene collections. This is all the things in your scene and it'll turn it on orange around it by left clicking. If you hit the period key on your numpad, it zooms in and out. You can also go to object mode here. And actually I have a little thing you can't see, which is my recorder, but object mode here. And you can see there's a bunch of different ways of viewing your object. There's add, there's select. You can invert your selection so it selects everything in your scene here. Let's see. View, different view options. And we'll go through a lot of this stuff as we go along. But let's see what else we can do. If we right click on an object in our view here, you can see there's a bunch of different stuff. You could view, it says show active here. You can click that and that'll show it as active. Let's see what else. A couple other things you can do is with this selected, you can hide it in your scene by making it visible and invisible. You can make it so that it's not able to be rendered. And we'll talk about rendering later. You could also click your object here and you can click on your camera. And what it'll do is it'll frame the camera on that object. And so when you go to render, you can just render that scene. You can click that again. You can also lock this so you can move your camera around. Like I'm actually just clicking my middle wheel in now instead of scrolling it to rotate around. And then you just unlock that view, which is pretty nice. I absolutely love Blender. I love that it's free. And I just think it's a world-class program, and now it's used for professional development. It's no longer like a hobbyist tool. How do you delete objects from your scene? You can select it and hit delete. You can hit Control Z or Command Z, I think, on the Mac to delete objects. You can hit Shift A here, or you can go up to Add, and you can go to Mesh, and we could add something like a plane. If I want to move things around, I have these move tools here. So for example, say I want to move my cube up in the air and I want to scale this cube out. I can click the scale tool here and then I can click in the middle and just kind of scale out, or actually click it outside in this little ring area and uniform scale it. Something I like to do is just hit the S key for scale, just move my mouse to the right or left. So S to move around. If you select the cube, you can hit G and it freeform moves it. Well, let's say you want to move it on a specific axis, right? So I want to move it just up and down. Up in the top here, this is our axis controller. You can see here's Z, Y, and X. So if I hit G here, right? G to move my cube around. Let's select that again. And I was hitting F, but let's just go to maybe select mode where you can highlight. So I highlight this guy, and then I hit G, I'm moving it around. If I press Z, I can just zoom, or sorry, I can lock it on the Z axis, not zoom. All right. Same thing with this. If I hit S and I only want to scale it on the X axis, I can press the X key and I can scale it up on that. I'm not going to go too far into that. I want to go into more cool stuff like explosions and physics and all that stuff. So that's a basic overview. How I'm able to pan like that is I'm holding shift and middle mouse clicking, and that lets me pan around my scene. Alt and rotating snaps the view. See that how I snapped it to X? If I want to snap it to Y, I hold Alt, and now I'm snapping it to this Y axis. Now, if you've ever taken any of my other classes, like the game studies class or the world building one of the things that we talk about is physics. And the way that you create physics inside of a game or video is using something called a rigid body. So with my cube selected, and I know it's selected because it's orange, I'm just going to move it above the ground here. And I'm going to go down to the side here, and you can see there's these different tabs here. I'm going to go down to physics here. Go ahead and click that on. And now you can see that there's force field, soft body fluid. These are all of our physics systems, right? If you want to make water, what I'm going to do is just click on rigid body. And you can see here it added a rigid body on our scene. Now, if I press play, what that's going to allow us to do is it adds it where it goes through the ground, right? Now, the reason it's going through the ground is because there's weight or physics to this, but it doesn't know that I want this one here to essentially be a collision object where it can collide with it, right? Now, before I get too far into the sticks, the way that I was able to get it to play is I hit the spacebar key on my keyboard, or what I can do is I can press play here. Now, if I go here and I select this cube again, and you'll notice that when I hit Control Z, it removed it. So I'm going to add that back in. So now if I hit spacebar, you can see it falls. And then if you want to return to the first frame, you can just click 0 here, and that'll bring you back to the beginning. Now, if I move this, you'll notice that for some reason, it actually remembered all of that animation, right? Which is kind of interesting. And so you could always rewipe that or delete that as you go by expanding this little arrow here and then go to summary. And let's see. And let's make sure that we are in our, let's see, we're in timeline here. That looks good. And we'll get into setting the keys and recording in a second. Now, if we select our plane here, in order to get these two to interact with each other, we want to turn another rigid body on this. Now, pay attention to this where it says active. When I press play here, notice that they both fall, but I want this object here to be a passive rigid body, which means when this hits this, it doesn't move, it just stays static, like almost like a strong object. So when I switch this to passive and I hit spacebar, notice that it falls and we get a little bit of physics, like a little bit of bounce on that cube. So let's kind of make this a little more interesting. I'm going to hit R to rotate, see that? And then I just want to rotate that on the x-axis. Now, how do I know that I want to rotate on the x-axis? Because this is the x-axis here that runs through it. So let's move it up top. Oops, let's go back to 0 here so that we could reset it. Otherwise, it just remembers our settings. Down here at the bottom, here, okay, so we're going to hit R and then X, and I'm just going to rotate it a little bit, and then I'm going to hit spacebar again. Now you can see we get a little bit more visual interest on our physics object. All right, so for in the short term, I don't like how these are both gray. So what I can go in here is click this little arrow here in viewport shading, and I could just turn on random for color. And now this will give us random colors for our scene so that, it makes it a little bit easier to see our cube and our plane. All right, so let's go ahead and hit R and then X and then 0 to flatten it out. Oops. Actually, what we can do is we can look at all of the changes we made. So I'm going to go make sure I'm on 0 here. And you could see that there's these transform location, rotation, and scale. So I'm going to go ahead and 0 out these rotations here for my cube. And then for the location on 1, let's see. Our pivot point is up top. We could move it to the bottom, but I'm just going to place it here for now. And what I want to do is create essentially a brick wall of these pieces, right? So I'm going to hit S to scale this down, and then I'm going to hit S and X to scale it out widthwise, like that. And what we'll do is we'll create like a little simulation of a ball breaking through a brick wall. Okay, so here's our frame 0 here. Now let's switch our view so that we're looking at it front on. You can hit the Y key here to do that. You can also hit the tilde key to the right of the number one key, and then you could select front. Another thing we could do is you can actually just hit the number 1 key if you have a keyboard or numpad. So what I want to do is just kind of line this up a little bit so it's just sitting right above my ground here, just slightly. All right, so let's go ahead and select this. And all right, now press Z in your view and go to wireframe mode so we could see it in wireframe. Again, I'm gonna hit 1 again. I'm gonna hit Shift and D, and then I'm just going to hit X on the keyboard and just place it next to it. Select these two, Shift D, and then X again. And notice that I am in move mode here. That's this right here. So if you're like, if it's, let me kind of just break it even down simpler. So I want to move it this way. So I'm going to hit G is my move tool, right? So once I hit G, it'll lock me into this move mode here. Then Shift D, X, move that over. Shift D and X, and I'll move that over. And remember, because we're duplicating that object, they all have on the physics tab active rigid body physics. So all of these are physics objects, right? Now I can hit Shift R. Here, let's do Shift D, hit X, and then move that over. And if I wanted to, watch this. If I hit Shift and R, it'll actually do those last few steps together. So if I want to do this again, Shift D, and then this time I want to move it up on Y. Come on. So G and then Y. Sorry, that's not doing what I wanted to. Okay, let's try that again. So select all of these, hit Shift D, and if I hit G to move, you could see it's kind of lets me free move it. Then I'm going to hit Y and just move that up. It kind of glitched a little bit there, which is kind of weird. But anyway, let's kind of make sure that these guys are just slightly above it, but not intersecting, otherwise they'll explode. And then Shift R. Oh, it remembered my, sorry, it remembered my movement. Okay, Shift D, move it up on the Y axis. Come on, let me move it up on the Y. Why are you acting so strange? G and Y, move it. I think the pivot point is off. And this gets some use too, because you can left click and move. It kind of acts weird. Okay, Shift D, move these up. Shift R, Shift R, Shift R. That's kind of a huge wall. Maybe I got a little bit too excited about making this wall. So I'll delete all of these, grab these guys. And I hold left, because in selection mode or move mode, you can hold Alt or hold the left arrow down, and then you could hold Control and deselect the ground plane. And then these are lights here, which looks like I duplicated the lights, which is probably not a good thing. So we'll go ahead and just select all of these by holding Shift and left clicking all these additional lights I made. We only need one in our scene. And then I'm going to hit Z and I'm going to go to solid. You can see your brick wall. Now, if I hit spacebar, you can see they kind of fall and they collapse on top of each other. So they're like a bunch of bricks with no mortar, and that's okay. All right. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. All right. So as a challenge to you for now, go ahead and make a ball and have it on a ramp and have it go down and blow up this cube. But one thing I want to show you before you do that is there's one last property that you can adjust, and this is this mass here. So for instance, if I make this brick 100 and I go ahead and I hit the spacebar key, that brick is 100 times stronger or has 100 times more weight than these guys, which have 1. So I'm going to hit spacebar here. Notice that that brick was able to smash through those bricks below it. So that's kind of a cool property, and we'll get through the other properties as we go, and that we get more advanced. So let's change that one back to 1. This brick property here, and again, you want to make sure you're in the physics tab here, change the mass to 1, and pause the video and make that. That's going to be your assignment, but I'll do it together anyway to show you how to do it. All right, so hopefully you did it and you had fun. So what did we do? We go to mass, we add a cube to represent a ramp. So I'm just going to do something like this. So S and then G to scale this down. So sorry, S and G. I usually go a little bit further. Sorry, S to scale, and then YX, or I'm used to using Unity and the other ones where Y is up. So I'm going to do Z here and I'm going to move it down. That's probably why it was kind of messing me up before. Is I sometimes work in Maya at work. I do work for Netflix. And so I'm using Maya and Unity sometimes. Actually, I'm starting to use Blender more, but the Z and Y are flipped. So let's just kind of make S and then Y, make a really long ramp here. I'm going to place it like this, and then I'm going to hit R to rotate, and I'm going to rotate on the X axis here by hitting X. Just move it down like this. And let's give this let's make this add the rigid body to this. Let's make this passive. And then I'm going to hit Shift A and just go to Mesh, and then I'm going to add a sphere. I'm going to move it up, and let's give this some good mass. And I'm just going to place it here. Hit S to scale that down. But even though it's a small sphere, it's going to have a little bit of punch to it. So we want to add a rigid body to this. We'll make it active, and for the weight, we're going to make this like 500. All right, so let's go ahead and hit spacebar on this, and you can see it's rolling down, and it hits the wall and it breaks it. Kind of lame. Let's make it, oops, I hit Control S to save. I'm going to hit spacebar here. I'm thinking we make this, we give it more punch here. So I'm going to hit S and X to scale this out. I'm really going to scale this guy up. Let's give it 1,000 weight. Hit spacebar. There we go. That's much cooler. All right, so what we can do is let's talk a little bit about rendering. So if we go to our mode here, I'm going to go ahead and hit escape. Oh man, I hope this didn't crash. All right, I had a little bit of a crash, but that's okay. So let's take a look at how you can render your assignment. It was more of a slowdown. So we have let's go to frame 1 here, and I'm just going to go ahead and hit spacebar here and drop it down. You can see that looks pretty good. You could, if you wanted to, hide the sphere and the plane by turning off the visibility and the rendering. Well, we want the plane actually. We want, which cube is this? Here's another thing we should do. We should name this. So I'm double clicking that and I'm just going to type in ramp. But say you turn that off as well. Where's our ramp? And we make that non-renderable. You could do something like this where it just looks like the wall explodes. Boom, like that. It's up to you. I kind of like the setup that we have. So I'm going to turn on rendering and visibility. Remember to turn these cameras on, do not forget, because then it won't render in our scene. Now, if you hit F11, it's going to render, I think, frame 0. Let's see. Or it renders the last frame that we had visible. So let's go ahead and set up our render properties. So click on this little output here that looks like a printer. And what we're going to do is we're going to select FMPEG, which is the last option here. That's for video. And then we're going to navigate to a folder. I have this one here. I did a test render a moment ago to make sure this works. And I'm just going to name this 01 ball through wall. And I'm going to hit accept. And this is going to be your first assignment. Again, I want to go into the camera and take a look. Now, the next thing I want to do is set up lighting. I'm going to delete the lights that are in my scene now. And what you'll see is when you click this last option here for lighting, it's going to be completely dark. So I'm going to hit Shift A here, and I'm just going to go to light, and I'm going to add a sunlight. And then I'm going to move that up. Let's just make sure that we select our sun. And I'm actually going to hit G and Y because it's really conflicting with my bricks here. I'm going to move this up. And then what I can do is, let's just kind of get out of this view for a second, is I can click my rotation here and I could say, you know what, I want it to be something like this, or it could be fine that it's up like that. I'm going to hit Shift D again, and I'm going to hit G, and then I'm going to hit the X key and then just shift this one over. The reason for that is this particular light, I just want it to be my tone light, so you can name this tone light if you want. And this could just be my sun. So for my sun, I'm going to select this little option here for the light. I'm going to leave shadows on. For my tone light, I'm going to turn shadows off. And this is just going to be used to tint my shadows with a specific color, give it a little bit of atmosphere. Let's go back to our camera here. And again, with this last option up here, which allows this shaded mode viewed, I can hit spacebar. I'm going to let this play out. Boom. And we've got our ball going through our bricks. Now, again, we went into here, and we're at frame like 128. I'm going to let it go all the way to 150. I'm going to go to my rendering here. I want to set this to 1 and 150. And if you want it to be a bit smoother, you can render it out at 30 frames per second. So something like this. And then with all of that going on, you can hit Control F12, I believe, or you can just click here and go View or Render Animation. Let me move my render animation. And that'll render it out to this folder here. which I have videos. Blender VFX is the folder name that I made. So as this goes through, let that render out. All right, so that's our first assignment. And if we go navigate to that videos folder, so I'm going to right click in here, see if it takes me to videos. You got a bunch of other stuff going on here. I've got my Blender VFX going on right here. You can see I have example assignment 01 ball through wall. This is what you're going to upload to YouTube. And then you're going to embed this into your Wix website. So there you go. And that's it. That's it for this assignment. This is your first assignment. I hope you enjoy it and you have lots of fun.